Evan Dando still in tow, Oasis checked into a Heathrow hotel, ready for a flight to their first ever Irish gig. I got back to the hotel, says Noel, and as I walked into the lift, out came Evan with all these police around him. Apparently, he'd gone a bit wild in his room and smashed up the TV set, and they'd come to arrest him. I was like, "It's okay, mate, he's with us, we'll pay for it, now let him go." And they did. Next day, he continues, we got to the airport and everyone was putting the bags through the metal detector. Suddenly, alarms started going off. All these guys with guns appeared from nowhere and the x-ray of Evan's bag made it look like there was a bomb in it. They were convinced he was some sort of major terrorist. Anyway, they open his bag and inside there's all these bits of metal and glass and wires. It's the remains of the TV he smashed up the night before. He's way out there, man. You've just got to stand back. Completely mad. That night's gig in Dublin was an emotional experience for Liam and Noel, a return to their Irish roots and the first time they'd ever played there. Oasis have, in the past, defined themselves as Irish, an impassioned if not completely convincing reclamation of their roots. At times, it seemed to have been spawned more from a desire to be awkward than anything else. But peel back the Manx-Scally facade and you start to comprehend the instinctively isolationist impulse that drives much of Oasis's music. Noel would never admit it, but he lives his life like he's always taking on board a first day at school, the outsider making his mark and, at the same time, confirming his otherness. Every single song that Noel Gallagher writes has traces of his Irish roots smeared between the lines. Dublin was a good gig, but afterwards there was this big queue at the dressing room door, says Noel. It was all our relatives, hundreds of them. They were going, "This is your auntie's second cousin and this is his dog. I think we met half of Ireland that night." They played to an equally ecstatic response in Belfast before flying back home for a nerve-wracking experience, a gig at the Hacienda in Manchester, their first hometown gig since June. Unsurprisingly, there was nervousness in the air, a sense that Oasis still had something to prove. The Scallies were out in force as the doors opened, touting tickets for as much as £100 a shot. An unfortunate choice of word perhaps, with the Hacienda a notorious playground for the gun gangs from Moss Side and Cheetham Hill. The band played a brilliant edgy set, a forehead-slapping reassertion that they weren't about to stand politely beneath any kind of Manchester banner, especially if the city's lieutenants had insisted on completely missing the point of everything that Oasis represented. Oasis aren't a Manchester band, they're a band from Manchester. It's much more than a matter of linguistics. When you dive deep into the Manchester business, you need some decompression time before you head anywhere else. And when that anywhere else is Japan, you really ought to take a couple of lifetimes to reacclimatise yourself. Oasis took a week. I told the others not to be too excited about Japan, says Noel. I've been there within spiral carpets, and they'd gone down all right, but the audiences were really reserved and polite. I was expecting that we'd turn up there and have a job getting people into us. You were wrong. I was wrong. They should have realised when they found out that the tickets for a 6-date tour of the country had sold out in less than a day. Right from their arrival at Tokyo's Narita airport, it started to get obvious that Noel had drastically underestimated the reactions of every girl within a 200-mile radius. Oasis might have been signed to Sony, but at the time they hadn't released a record in Japan. It didn't stop the fans mobbing them every time they even thought about going outside. It really was one of the weirdest weeks I've ever had in my life, says Noel. There were girls coming up after every show giving us all these presents, really expensive stuff like Beatles rarities that even I hadn't seen before. There was this one girl who followed us round to every gig, all over Japan, and each night she gave me a different bit of Gaultier clothes. By the end of the tour, I had a whole suit, loads of shirts, ties, everything. We had to go out and buy suitcases just so we could fill them with all the stuff they'd given us. For a few magical days, Oasis knew what it was like to have the world revolve around them. It made me realise what Beatlemania must have been like, says Johnny Hopkins. After the last of their 4 sellout gigs in Tokyo, they discovered a place called the Cavern Club and, unsurprisingly, decided to pop their heads in. For 5 hours or so. They were even happier once they found out about the house band, a combo called the Parrots, whose set consisted entirely of Beatles cover versions. Ask Noel about his favourite song ever and he'll tell you it's the Beatles' Ticket to Ride. He likes the way the protagonist thinks he's going to be sad and thinks it's today. And most of all, like he said, he loves the way you know just before it happens that there's going to be a chord change. He's consistently, perhaps understandably, resisted doing a cover version of Ticket to Ride. In Japan, he did record a cover of You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, though available on import versions of Some Might Say, and played for one day only on Radio 1 on International AIDS Day. If I cover a Beatles song, says Noel, I'm just doing something that someone else has written. When we do I Am the Walrus, we're doing a song that the Beatles never played live, and I think we do it better than they would have done it. We turn it into an Oasis song. With something like Ticket to Ride, it's just a copy. I don't know if I can ever write a song as good, but I'm going to keep on trying. It's the really simple songs that you hear once and think you've known all your life. They're the classics. They're the ones that matter. At their last gig in Tokyo, Oasis played, in their own opinion, better than they'd ever done before. And for the first time, they did an encore. We did that gig in Japan and it was brilliant, says Noel. None of us wanted to go off, so we decided to do an encore. It was the first one we ever did. Tony had thrown all his drumsticks into the crowd, so he had to ask for someone to give him some to play with. We did Rock and Roll Star, because that was what it was all about. That was how I felt. They were indestructible, and even the groupies at the hotel afterwards couldn't take away the feeling that Oasis could do anything, that they ruled the world. Next stop, America. You look back, says Johnny Hopkins, and you realise that after Japan, America was going to be a complete shock. And how? Seattle went well. The band's still high on their Southeast Asian excursion, a euphoria that was to carry them through to the next date in San Francisco, and the first suggestion that the American record business wasn't just going to settle for the self-confident swagger that had always worked before. The superficiality that had fluttered around the edges of their previous American trip suddenly careered centre stage, making it clear that if Oasis didn't play by American rules, they could kiss goodbye to US success. Everyone tried to confront the situation the only way they knew how, by getting completely blasted. Bonehead's brother Martin lived in LA, and his gaff seemed as good a place as any to start a search for the self-belief that had got them so far in the first place. Even now, they won't admit they were scared, but after Japan, it was obvious that America was going to do their heads in. They got themselves a slot on their old buddy Rodney Bingenheimer's show on K-Rock, bizarrely overlapping with a problem phone-in and finding themselves having to offer advice to jilted lovers. Bonehead's cunning plan never wavered. Sue, he said. Just sue. Just about everyone who rang up was urged to scurry away to a lawyer immediately. One guy rung in asking about penis extensions. We've got a penis extension, said Noel. He's our drummer. Getting steadily more wasted, the band headed over to Johnny Depp's club, the Viper Room, and almost inevitably ended up getting thrown out. The party moved on to Bonehead's brothers, and sometime round dawn, the LAPD arrived, cautioning them about disturbing the peace. By then, Noel had snatched a few hours' sleep, and the rest of the band had been up for 72 hours, just to see what would happen. They found out that night at the Whiskey A Go-Go, one of LA's most famous venues and a perfect showcase for Oasis. Even Ringo Starr turned up to check the Beatles aficionados he'd heard so much about. He must have wished he'd stayed at home. The gig was a complete shambles. No one knew what songs they were supposed to be playing. When they eventually did start on one, they were a mess. Liam started baiting the audience. Noel started fighting with him, and during I Am the Walrus, walked off stage. I was disgusted by what had happened, says Noel. It was complete shit. I said to the others, I don't want to do this if you're not going to put everything you've got into it. If you're going to fuck around, then do it when we've finished with the band. We'll have plenty of time then, but right now I'm going to be in a group who want to do something. No one said anything, so I thought, that's it. Fuck it, we're splitting up. I took all the money from the tour float and got on the first plane out of LA. I had half an ounce of coke with me and I thought, right, I'm having this, then I'm going home. It's over. He went to Las Vegas and San Francisco, increasingly paranoid and convinced that the FBI were tapping his phone. I really was ready to go back home, says Noel. But in a cab to the airport, I was reading a Melody Maker or something, and I saw an advert for all these Oasis gigs in England, and they were sold out. Anyway, I thought that if I'd been one of the people who bought tickets and the band had cancelled, I'd have thought Oasis were complete cunts. We played loads of gigs in Britain, but this was going to be the first really big tour. I knew I should go back to the others and we should sort it out. Honestly, he continues, after that gig, I really didn't want to be in Oasis anymore. I couldn't see any good coming out of carrying on. What was happening was completely the opposite of why we'd started in the first place. We were all getting caught up in a lot of madness. They decided to give it another go, but the wounds would take a long time to heal. Noel rang me and admitted that things had been going badly, but laid much of the blame at the relentless meet and greet rituals that the record company expected them to undertake. I didn't come all the way here just to shake hands with some executive knobhead's wife, he complained. And was he friends with the rest of the band again? No, they're all cunts. I flew out for the last 2 dates of the American tour in New Jersey and Manhattan. Their brother Paul had also turned up, trying to blag a job at Sony as soon as the wheels touched the tarmac, along with a sizable Mancunian contingent. During the first half of the New Jersey show, it was obvious that there was still a lot of animosity, none of them even looking at one another, let alone speaking. And something was missing from the sound. It had no heart. Halfway through the set, perhaps inspired by the Brit presence, they started to turn things around, restore some of the old magic. By the time they played Manhattan, again at Wetlands, they got the old spirit back. After the gig, Noel played a song he'd written while on the run. Talk Tonight was the finest thing he'd ever written, a melancholy reflection on his state of mind as he headed for Vegas, full of allusions to a girl he'd met in San Francisco who provided some sort of redemptive presence. I may have been completely pissed off, he said, but it wasn't going to stop me writing songs. Nothing ever will. Oasis came back to Britain to find Cigarettes and Alcohol at number 7 in the charts, their biggest hit so far. The closing months of the year were spent touring extensively in Britain and Europe, consolidating both their renewed vigour and their ever-growing popularity. Definitely Maybe top charts right across the continent, as well as notching up healthy sales as far away as Australia. They were fast shaking off any appearance of just another indie band, crossing over at last into mainstream success. They even managed to duck the censors with the lyric on Cigarettes and Alcohol about how you might as well do the white line. You have to give radio stations the lyrics, says Noel, so we just said Liam was singing You Might As Well Do the White Lime. We made up some story about how the whole song was about eating fruit, and they believed us. At a gig at Glasgow's Barrowlands, Liam's voice finally gave out and he stormed off stage, leaving Noel to take over for the rest of the set. The audience started to get angry. A riot was just about avoided, but not before promises were given to reschedule the gig. It did, however, re-emphasise Noel's growing vocal confidence. Like everyone else, he understood that no one could ever dominate a stage quite like Liam, but it made him increasingly confident of handling vocal duties on more of the songs. In December, Oasis released their 5th single in 9 months and only just missed out on a Christmas number 1. Whatever was the song that Noel had written almost 2 years earlier and promised would be top 5 at Christmas '94. That he was right was almost taken for granted, such was the confidence in the Oasis camp. It made number 3, beaten only by E17 and Mariah Carey, and the difference in sales was just a matter of a few thousand. The band ended the year with 2 big gigs in Brighton and Middlesbrough. At the former, Liam found himself a new, if annoying, admirer. Paula Yates latched onto him at a party after the gig and wouldn't let him out of her sight, causing him to conclude, "That woman is completely mad. I keep on telling her to fuck off, but she won't listen." The next day, on the wall behind her bed on the set of The Big Breakfast, Paula had stuck a photo of Liam up. Perhaps he hadn't made his point clearly enough. In fact, it was another admirer that was to prove rather more enduring. At a gig in Cambridge a month earlier, Chrissie Hynde from The Pretenders had brought a friend along to see the band and meet Liam afterwards. He and Patsy Kensit hit it off right from the start. I recall a late-night conversation with Liam in a hotel bar sometime earlier. I asked him whether he'd ever been in love. "No," he replied. "Only this close," and he spread his arms as far apart as he could to elaborate. "The thing about love," he said, "is that some people think it's like the Derby, when in fact it's like the Grand National." Liam knew that if he was going to make any relationship work, he'd have to learn to deal with a whole load of obstacles, and he wasn't going to fall in love until he knew he'd been able to deal with them. If 1994 had been hectic, the new year didn't look like being any different. Marcus and the band were convinced of the importance of maintaining the momentum that had built up, particularly in America, so the band spent the first 4 months of the year building up the transatlantic air miles and finally beginning to see their persistence paying off. Back home, the awards were starting to roll in. At the Brits, they picked up Best New Band, although they felt they ought to have won more. Their frustration was compounded by the fact that Blur swept the board, although to their credit, the latter did suggest in their acceptance speech that their Best Band award should have been shared with Oasis. Oasis should have taken the olive branch and responded with some sort of grace, but such was the single-mindedness at the time that they saw no space for compromise or conciliation. You were the best or you were nothing. Oasis were more successful at the enemy-sponsored Brat Awards, picking up Best Band, Best New Band and Best Single for Live Forever. Noel's acceptance speech acknowledged the importance of the support of the fans, but he also made sure he got a few indiscriminate insults in towards most of his peers, claiming that every other band present was crap. Afterwards, a few of us went back to Noel's place. In fact, Johnny Marr had let him use his home in Fulham, a gorgeous flat that impressed on Noel the kind of luxury that accompanies real success. Noel was raving about a new song he'd written and played a rough demo tape. A stirring pop song, one of the most self-contained, complete things he'd yet come up with. Before he played the tape of the new song, I jokingly asked him what he'd ripped off this time. He didn't even pause. Ooh La La by The Faces. It's a top tune. The song was Some Might Say, and it was finally to give Oasis their first number one. We were lost. Completely. Photographer Tom Sheen and I had been invited to Loco Studios in South Wales, where Oasis were to record their single Some Might Say. Unfortunately, we'd trusted our safe passage to a cab driver, with apparently even less local knowledge than we had. After a mere 4 or 5 hours, we finally located Loco Studios, hidden behind a hedge and signposted merely by a small pile of white stones. The studio itself is a kind of technological TARDIS, contained in what looks like a converted folly, complete with accommodation, a treehouse, and the sort of views guaranteed to unblock even the most bunged up of creative impulses. I love the countryside, I'm mad for it, announced Liam as soon as we arrived. Hardly what you'd expect of a child of the city, a 24-hour party person with a notoriously low boredom threshold. But what would he find to do? I wondered. I'd get a full-length mirror, stand in front of it, and have a ruck with myself. Cities do me head in. He still had 3 days recording to go. Much of the instrumental work had already been done, and Bonehead, Gwiggs and Tony were ready to head back to Manchester. Liam would stay to record his vocals, just as soon as Noel had finished writing them. Then Noel and producer Owen Morris would tinker with things until they'd found the perfect Oasis sound. There'd be arguments, obviously. For a moment at least, though, they were buzzing at the very real prospect of achieving the full-blown success they'd promised for so long. A show of strength that would lift them above the level of mere indie chances. This atmosphere of solidity was enhanced by the presence of Bonehead's 8-week-old daughter, Lucy Oasis. Noel's the godfather, revealed Bonehead's fiancée, Kate, prompting the thought that the poor child was destined to receive birthday gifts of guitars and Beatles bootlegs for the rest of her days. No, said Kate, he's really good. He's got lots of fluffy toys and things. Not that Noel had entirely forsaken his musical enthusiasms. He showed me the plectrum he was going to use to play the guitar lines on Some Might Say, an ultra-rare Beatles souvenir with George Harrison etched on it. Top, eh? He said. It's going to be the inspiration. He also revealed that he'd solved the problem of what other songs were going to go on the single, playing me first a track called Acquiesce. The title had already been used by the highly literate Elvis Costello acolyte Amy Mann, but it's not the sort of word you'd expect the determinedly direct Noel Gallagher to use. I was watching the O.J. Simpson trial on TV and it came up in that, he revealed. I didn't have a clue what it meant, but it sounded a dead good word. I looked it up and it said it meant being dragged into something no matter how hard you try and resist, like the Pied Piper or something. It seemed pretty apt for Oasis. People hear us and they acquiesce. Acquiesce remains one of the most extraordinary songs Noel has ever written. Not just because of its inherent rock and roll quality, but because it's one of the few Oasis songs to address, albeit ambiguously, the relationship between the Gallagher brothers. The "we need each other, we believe in each other" chorus could easily be a straightforward boyfriend-girlfriend litany, but it's tempting to see it as the closest the Gallaghers have ever got to a sort of fraternal "I've got you, babe." As Noel waited to play the new mixes to Liam, he mused on the state of their publicly stormy relationship. Hey man, I love him, he's my brother. It's just that we don't bottle things up. If we get pissed off with each other about something, we just get it out in the open, punch each other and get over it. I mean, I get pissed off if his voice fucks up, but I know it's only because he's been working so hard and his voice needs a rest. I wonder whether Noel really understands Liam, knows what makes him tick. He told me in Wales that the two of them were very different in their most basic of impulses. I haven't a clue what he's really thinking. It's like he's at war with the world, but I don't know why. There's something really getting to him, but I don't know what it is. He's always questioning everything, looking for answers. With me, it's like life's just a load of questions. If I don't find the answers, then fuck it, they'll turn up later on. Our kid doesn't want that. He just wants to know all the answers right now, this minute. Before recording his vocals, for some might say, Liam went off into Newport for an afternoon's drinking and shopping session. He returned after an extensive pub crawl. Do you think we go anywhere after we die? He asked himself as much as anyone else, demanding that everyone within earshot witness him running through the options. I live for now, not for what happens when I die, he shouted, cigarette in one hand, Jack Daniels in the other, pacing up and down with that familiar pimp roll walk. If I die and there's something afterwards, I'm going to hell, not heaven. I mean, the devil's got all the good gear. What's God got? The inspiral carpets and nuns. Fuck that. As evangelical agnosticism goes, you'd be hard pushed to find a more convincing argument. I wondered what his epitaph would be. He didn't even blink. When I die, he said, I want them to write on my grave, don't fucking come here with your bunches of flowers. I don't even want a gravestone. I want a V sign, 2 fingers, a really fucking huge V sign, 20 foot tall or something. When you're dead, you're dead. It's now that matters. At war with the world, even in the afterlife. Over the 3 days I spent with them in Wales, they seemed to do most of the recording in impulsive bursts. They did take time off to watch The Word on TV. A clip of their first performance on the programme won the viewers' vote for the footage they most wanted to see again, attracting 28% of the registered votes. That meant a lot to me, Noel admitted the next day. I've never done what I do for anyone else, but, you know, those people who rang in, it proved we're right. You're wrong. That's shit. That's Liam. Sitting at the mixing desk, he'd just heard the putative first mix of Some Might Say. It's not shit, it's great, replied Noel. No, it's not. It's shit. It's weird. It's meant to be weird. Yeah, says Liam. Weird to everyone else, not to us. What do you think? Liam asked, turning to me and putting me in perhaps the least enviable position in the whole world, in the middle of an argument between the Gallaghers. I thought about pretending to be either mute, French or dead. In the end, I just coughed for ages, until they both got bored and went outside to push each other around for a bit. Finally, Noel returned to twiddle more knobs with producer Owen Morris. Liam and I went off for a drink. See what happened then, he said. That's what happens all the time. That's why people say we're always fighting. I'm just standing up for myself. He thinks it's his band and we're all supposed to be sheep. The rest of them go along with it, but I'm not going to. I mean, if he told them all to turn up tomorrow because we were going to play a gig under a lamppost, they'd just do it. It's like when Bonehead's girlfriend was pregnant, he continued. If I'd find out my girlfriend was pregnant, I wouldn't have gone on the tour. I'd have just said, fuck it, there's more important things. We're not just old Bartholomew's backing band like he sometimes thinks. I mean, he wouldn't have joined if I hadn't been there in the first place. I wrote 3 songs back then, and I admit 2 of them were shit. The other one was alright though. And I wrote the chorus to Columbia. I'm not useless, and I'm going to start proving it. I've given up the pot, and I'm cutting back on the boozing. You waste so much time when you're just pissed and lazy. I'm going to learn to play the guitar properly and write some songs. And would Noel welcome the creative input from him? No, of course he fucking wouldn't. It's like when we were on the last tour, I had an idea for backing vocals on one of the songs, but when I told him, he just went, no, that's shit. Then, when we did the song, he started doing backing vocals, just like I'd said. I went, I told you that'd be good, but he went, no, they were different backing vocals. He's just too proud to admit that I'm right sometimes. I just wish he'd remember sometimes that Oasis is a band. And, for 10 minutes at least, I suddenly found myself in that band too. As the alcohol and pharmaceuticals helped to dissipate tensions, Noel suggested that we all help out with hand claps. So a motley crew, including me, the band's press officer Johnny Hopkins, Oasis sleeve photographer Michael Spencer-Jones, designer Brian Cannon and a girlfriend of Liam's called Kadamba, trooped into the studio to clap along to no more than 10 seconds of music which would then be looped throughout the song. A seemingly simple task, but one which found us plumping for a passable impersonation of a group of disorientated performing seals. A couple of hours later, producer Owen Morris finally pronounced himself satisfied, presumably to avoid further damage to his forehead from banging it on the mixing desk in frustration. Back upstairs, Noel and Liam were embarking on a kind of scrap by proxy as they watched the Ben McClellan boxing match. Before they had time to recreate the fight in the corner, Morris returned to play the final mix of Some Might Say. 4 minutes later, most of us were conclusively convinced that it would provide the band with their first number one. The original demo had been beefed up, layered with a glorious affirming noise, but still shot through with an irresistible melodic brilliance. Yeah, number one. The only person who didn't seem surprised poured himself a drink. Yeah, of course it'll be number one, said Noel. That's what it's there for. Monday the 17th of April 1995. The band's first full-length UK show of the year. Sold out since the dog end of winter and ticket touts charging upwards of £50 a pop. The name Oasis, marked out in lights across the front of Southend Cliffs Pavilion, shone across the bay with a neat classicism far removed from the gaudy fairground and fish bar vulgarity a few hundred yards down the coast. It defined a dizzying future rather than tarted up an increasingly unreal past. It was a marvellous, grubbly bacchanalian atmosphere, but somehow blurred the focus of the performance by Oasis themselves. Sure, there was power and passion, thunder under the lighting, but there was also a messiness to the proceedings, a sense of some cult religion not yet fully focused, torn this way and that by mere bluster. It didn't help that the gig was being filmed. The audience, many of whom memory insists were actually eating chips, filled the gaps between songs with football chants and drunken psychobabble. No bad thing in itself, but not best appreciated by an already obstreperous Oasis. The internal cracks in the band that were to come to a head a few days later ensured that they'd spend much of the set sniping amongst themselves. But then, as they've done so often, they somehow turned it around. By the time they concluded with the by now obligatory I Am the Walrus, they'd even redirected the crowd's energies into wide-eyed approval. Or maybe it was just the drink. In the dressing room afterwards, the white lines racked out and the alcohol flowing like Niagara, the band seemed pleased to have got the year's first show out of the way. Happier yet that their fan base appeared now to have risen into the thousands. There was an impromptu party in the venue afterwards, then the band left, ready for the next leg of the jaunt. As they set off, Liam was arguing with Tony, the drummer. It was an argument that would never end. Thursday the 20th of April, Paris. Although you wouldn't have known it by the coachloads of scallies from Liverpool, Manchester and London who barged through the doors of the Bataclan Club. Not that the British contingent made up the whole audience. By then, Oasis had already built up healthy sales in France of Definitely Maybe. The record company presented them with silver discs in the dressing room beforehand, and Whatever, only just released over there, was already in the top 5. Hence, a voluble, enthusiastic young Parisian presence, with just about everyone joining in with every word. It was one of the greatest gigs Oasis have ever played, perhaps because they all knew it was a final goodbye to small venues, a farewell to having to be defined by anyone else's ideas of what was possible. From here on in, they were going to start writing their own rule book. In the hotel bar afterwards, a quick drink appeared to have all the makings of total madness, until a fight broke out between Liam and Tony. The argument that had been simmering, certainly for days, more probably for months, was concluded when the singer of the greatest rock and roll band in the world punched out the drummer. Noel, cranked up on industrial quantities of Pro Plus, headed off to his room. "I've got a song to finish," he told me. "I was listening to this John Lennon bootleg and it's got this great line about the brains I had went to my head. I'm having that." "What, you're just going to nick it?" "Well, yeah, it'd be a shame to waste it. The song's going to be a classic." Saturday the 22nd of April. Sheffield Arena is one of those huge purpose-built venues that lie on the outskirts of nearly every major British city. With over 10,000 people, it was Oasis's biggest gig to date, and a hint of just how big they were about to become. Inside the venue, Oasis mania had reached fever pitch. The gig started at full pelt and didn't let up for close to 2 hours. It also featured the first example of Noel's now regular solo acoustic slots. Perched on a stool, he played a couple of already recorded Oasis songs, then announced, "This is a new song I wrote in Paris on Tuesday. It's for you, Mather, 'cause you haven't heard it yet." The song was Don't Look Back in Anger, the most mature thing Gallagher had yet written. And sure enough, he'd nicked the Lennon line about "You said the brains I had went to my head." "I told you I would," he said later. The backstage party found a functional dressing room converted into what seemed like a Turkish opium den. Everybody in the band seemed ecstatic, apart from Tony. That was definitely the end of something, Bonehead told me at the time, and the beginning of something else. I think Tony knew it was the last gig he'd ever play with the band. It'd be a fortnight before the news broke to the general public, but it was obvious that night that he was right. Tony was out, and with only a fortnight until the release of Some Might Say, the record that was to be their first #1, they needed to find a new drummer. And fast. Some week, eh? Said Noel. Yeah, some week. Noel wanted a drummer he thought would be able to do justice to the new songs he'd written, and approached a guy called Alan White, the brother of Paul Weller's drummer, Steve. I'd never met him, says Noel, but I'd heard he was good, so I thought, well, I'll meet him and check him out. I'd arranged to meet him in this bar in Camden, and on the way there I thought, what if he's some ugly 30-stone bastard? I saw him coming towards me though, and I thought, thank fuck, he looks normal. So I just said, right mate, you're in. And he's going, well, don't you want to hear me play? I just said, no mate, you're not 30 stone, you look alright, do you want the job? Right, now, here's a copy of the single, learn the drums for it and you're doing Top of the Pops with the band tomorrow. It was as easy as that. Alan White, born and raised in London, had been drumming for years in various small-time bands, but never achieved anything like the profile of his brother. Nevertheless, Alan's enthusiasm was also accompanied by a very real talent, and one which was to make an important contribution to the development of the Oasis sound. Amazingly, despite the rapidity of his audition, he's never been daunted by his role. Now, the second gig I ever did was at Glastonbury. After that, everything else is a piece of piss. White also gives a whole new dynamic to the group. As well as being perfectly capable of drinking and partying along with the best of them, he exudes a sense of quiet stability that reinforces the band's increasing sense of solidity. Plus, he's a Cockney and no part of the Manchester image that's often hindered the band more than it's helped. In early May, after a triumphant Top of the Pops performance, they headed to the Rockfield studio in Wales for 5 weeks to record the second album. Within a couple of weeks, much of the album had been recorded, including the forthcoming single, Roll With It, recorded first take as Noel emerged blearily from a major drinking session. As so often before, however, a protracted period of creativity wasn't going to pass by without a swerve towards catastrophe. That came when Noel arrived back at the studio one night to find Liam hosting a full-scale party. There was like half of Monmouth in there, says Noel, everyone completely off their faces. I didn't know who any of the people were and they were all just running around the studio. And there's people playing with me guitars, 30 grand's worth of stuff, and that's right out of order. Liam's going, we're just having a drink, but I wanted them all to fuck off. Me and our kid got in a fight and I hit him with a cricket bat. Then I said, can anyone drive? Alan went, I can. So I said, come on, you're driving me back to London. We're in the middle of making a great record and I can see it going completely off the rails. After a week chilling out away from the madness, he returned, forcefully reminding the others that they'd got so close to genuinely colossal success that to throw it away now would be the most stupid thing they'd ever do. Finally, at the end of July, the album was cut at, where else, Abbey Road Studios, and the band prepared for a summer of big-time performances around the country. First major event was Glastonbury, where they'd been so successful a year before. Noel had the cold sweats and insisted on walking around in the blazing heat in a fully toggled up duffel coat and a pair of shiny shoes, gloriously unsuited to the Greenfield site. He spent much of the time with his new best mate, Robbie Williams, at that time still with Take That. The two hit it off immediately, and Robbie was photographed drinking and smoking a spliff. It was to prove to be both his undoing and his salvation. The gig was largely a reminder that the band were as capable as anyone else of right royal cock-ups. 2 songs in, and Liam invited everyone present, all 100,000 of them, up for a fight. One disaffected punter insisted on lobbing 2 dozen eggs at the stage, although none hit the target. That the whole thing was going out live on Channel 4 didn't help much. The band did manage to turn it around a bit by the end of the set, particularly after Robbie had jumped on stage to dance along. I got my picture in the papers, says Robbie, and when I went to see the others in Take That a few days later, they said they'd had a meeting and they didn't think my behaviour was how someone in the band should behave. That's when they sacked me. I'm glad I did it though. Meeting Oasis completely changed my attitude to what I was doing and what I wanted to be. It freed me from a lot of things. A good day for Robbie perhaps, but for the band a major stumble. Maybe they weren't really as big as their imagination had insisted. We just fucked up, says Noel, but I knew we could still do it. I always like playing the big gigs better than the small ones. I don't like the audience being too close. Their next 2 gigs were under canvas at Irvine Beach in Scotland. 2 successive nights playing to 6,000 people. Performances which even now stand out as among the best shows they've ever done. Afterwards, the band embarked on a marathon drinking session, which ended with Liam punching a ceiling and storming off, while Noel conducted an alcoholically crippled interview with Miranda Sawyer, a journalist from The Observer. Still buzzing from the gig, he confessed, "I stare at hotel walls and wonder to myself, where did it go right?" It was when he started ranting about Blur that he said something he was to regret. The guitarist, I've got a lot of time for, he confessed. And the drummer, I've never met him, but I hear he's a nice guy. The bass player and the singer, I hope the pair of them get AIDS and die because I fucking hate them. Immediately he'd said it, he tried to retract it, but it was too late. When the comment was printed, it seemed to confirm the completely erroneous image of the band as typical mank homophobes. And by that time, the battle between Blur and Oasis would have even made it onto News at 10. In early August, Paul Weller played the Tea in the Park festival and Noel decided to hang out with him. He'd checked into the same hotel as me, and when I met him in the foyer, he promised to play me an advance tape of the album later. At 10:30, there was a phone call. "It's Noel. Come down to the lobby now." As I got out of the lift, Noel, his girlfriend Meg, Robbie Williams and their friend, the singer Lisa Moorish, were standing by the doors. Doors stormed 10 seconds later by hundreds of Take That fans. We ended up at Lisa Moorish's elegantly discreet hotel and, after the obligatory lines, Noel put the Morning Glory tape on. He'd later described the record as like half of it's in a hammock smoking a spliff and the other half's walking round the streets of London with a petrol bomb in its hand. That night he was content to insist, "It's the best thing you'll have heard in your life." 3/4 of an hour later, I was inclined to agree. After we'd forced Noel to play the tape of the album a dozen times, Robbie and I headed down to the bar. He opened up about his frustration with Take That, admitting that he'd been writing poems and lyrics of his own for years. I dumbly expected sixth form demonstrations of deficiency, but when he started reciting some of his words, I was blown away. They seemed far more suited to the kind of music being made by Oasis and their contemporaries. I told him as much in the corridor outside the hotel room, and threatened to recite as much as I could remember to Noel. "You can't," protested Robbie. "He's a proper songwriter. What if he thinks what I've written is shit?" Inside, I said to Noel, "You should hear Robbie's lyrics. They're brilliant. There's one that goes..." "OK," said Robbie, and he read out half a dozen of his songs. When he'd finished, Noel stayed quiet. I started to wonder whether I'd been wrong. "If you don't put those out in a year," said Noel, "I'm having them. They're fucking great, man." Back at my hotel, Robbie, Noel, Lisa and Meg kept the party going. As we got in the lift up to the room, a girl who couldn't have been more than 13 had burst through the security cordon. She stood in front of Robbie and said, "You betrayed the band, you cunt! You're dead!" It was one of the most disorientatingly disturbing moments of my life. A snapshot of success turned inside out and squeezed into a nasty new weapon. Robbie Williams, now very much ex-Take That, gave her the finger. At one point, Robbie was talking about how he hadn't had a day off since he was 16. 5 years of people telling him what he was supposed to do. Now he'd been kicked out of Take That, he felt robbed of confidence, convinced that anyone who'd ever rated him would soon forget that he'd ever existed. The Daily Star's hypocritical revelations about Robbie's lifestyle and his behaviour at Tea in the Park only contributed to his lack of self-confidence. I told him he should start to enjoy himself, asking him how much money he had in the bank. "I don't know exactly," he said to me. "Think about $1 million. "Shit," said Noel, the man who'd done nothing but enjoy himself for the last couple of years. "I haven't even got 1/10 of that." Within a year, a costly court case would leave Robbie almost penniless, and Noel would have more millions than fingers. Pop and roll shifts shape faster than he could ever imagine. "The court case cost a lot of money," says Robbie, "but I'm glad I'm doing what I'm doing now." After Take That, I'd been told that I was nothing, and I'd begun to believe it. Noel and Liam, though, they're really supportive. They were the ones that made me think, yeah, fuck it, I can do something. Have they been an inspiration? Of course they have. "He's a nice bloke," says Noel, describing Robbie, "and he's got the right attitude. But he's not joining the band, no matter what rumours you might hear. Top geezer, though." Blur had originally intended to release their new single towards the end of the month, just ahead of the release of their Great Escape album. When, however, Roll With It was scheduled for release on 14th of August, Blur decided to put their single out the same week in direct competition. And the whole affair degenerated into a ludicrous competition between the two that may have garnered a lot of media coverage, but which dragged both groups into an undignified slanging match. People in the creation camp tried to interpret the whole affair as some sort of daft class war, whereas Blur weren't any less cockeyed in resorting to accusations that Oasis were just a 90s version of Status Quo. Radio DJ Chris Evans played role with it over the phone to Blur's Damon Albarn in a hotel room in Glasgow, and Albarn responded by singing Quo's Rockin' All Over the World over the top of it. Oasis immediately put out their own t-shirts, emblazoned with the word Quoasis. When, on the 14th of August, the two singles were released head-to-head, the whole thing merely served to emphasise the manipulative vagaries of chart assault marketing. Oasis had a larger fan base than Blur and were expected to just beat their rivals to the top. When the result was finally revealed, though, Blur were in the top spot, and the recrimination started. In fact, Blur had got to number one simply by releasing their single in a variety of different formats, including 2 CDs with different bonus tracks. The fans, therefore, would have to buy 2 copies. I was really concerned that Noel had this idea that it was all our fault, says Alan McGee, so I went down to see him in the studio. I said to him, "How do you feel?" And he went, "How do you think I feel? I feel like number 2, man." It was obvious that he was really pissed off with us. After I'd told him about the whole format thing, though, I think he realised that it wasn't our fault. I don't think anyone came out of that whole Blur versus Oasis thing very well, but if anyone started it all, it was Blur. On the 5th of September, Noel went into Abbey Road Studios to record an acoustic version of Fade Away with friends Lisa Moorish and the actor Johnny Depp for the charity album Help. Artists all over the country were recording in studios on that day, the aim being to gather together all the tracks and have a finished album out within the week, all profits to go to help the people of Bosnia. Tony Crean was the man with the original idea for the album, and to their credit, all the acts involved did justice to the nobility of Crean's vision, the album ultimately raising enough money to make a very real difference to the lives of a lot of Bosnians. Paul Weller was due to record a track and asked Noel to help out. The two already had a history of working together that went back to Weller's previous Stanley Road album, when Noel had played guitar on a cover version of Dr. John's Walk on Gilded Splinters. Paul Weller played on Morning Glory, further emphasising the bond between him and Noel. As well as harmonica on Swamp Song, he also threw in guitar, harmonica and backing vocals on Champagne Supernova, the track that Noel had conceived as a stairway to heaven for the 90s, without all the elves and cosmic shite. "It was weird when I started to get friends with him and we hung out together," says Noel. "He'd been sitting there all night while I asked him millions of questions about the jam. If anyone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be friends with him and playing on one of his albums, I'd have been, yeah, right, fuck off." At Abbey Road, though, his wildest dreams were just about to come sashaying in. As befitting the location, a plan was made to do a cover of the Beatles' Come Together. Suddenly, the doors opened, and in came Paul McCartney with his wife Linda, ready to play. And so, under the banner Mojo Filters, the pictures on Gallagher's bedroom wall all those years before came down to give him a smile he still hasn't entirely wiped off his face. In Japan, that summer of '95, their 7 gigs had sold out in hours. Fans were only too happy to oblige the band's every whim, which included a narcotic supplement to the endless drinking. Liam's voice was shot to pieces, and sleep deprivation had kicked in all round. But immediately after the tour, they were obliged to halt their forthcoming product in various European cities. By the time they reached Paris, the wheels that had spent so long trying to control a joyride around the global car park finally came loose. A live interview at a Parisian radio station had been ruined when Liam decided that having comedian Eddie Izzard was some sort of slight on a perceived notion of Oasis as all-conquering. He walked out and ended up getting punched by the band's tour manager Ian Robertson. As the night wore on, Liam got stroppier than ever, laying into Gwigs for something that only the ice cubes in the triple shot of JD will ever know. Liam Gallagher is, by some distance, the most complex person I know, and also the most spiritual. While he's undeniably guilty of regularly shitty behaviour, he's precociously aware of life's thunderously intangible subtleties. His headlong barrelling into a celebration of life all too often muddles the initial impulse, concentrates on the fact that he's done the lines rather than appreciating that he's spotted the sparkles between them as well. He goes for it, vindicated by his youth and an acknowledgement from those within a worldwide radius around him that he's an iconic personification of the classic rock and roll star. And when he's wrong, you can't expect him to admit it until the speedway inside his head has slowed sufficiently to reveal the world outside as more than just an impressionistic blur. Gwiggs knew what Liam was like and understood that words were just words. That night in Paris, though, he'd suddenly felt that maybe he couldn't put up with it anymore. There was a weariness he'd not previously experienced, a fast-forward flash about having to go through it all again, night after night, on the 12-berth tour capsule dragging itself across America's highways. He pulled out of the next day's interviews and asked for a ticket straight back to London. A few days later, Oasis told the world that Gwiggs had left the group for a bit because of nervous exhaustion. He'd been missing from the forthcoming British and American tours while he sorted himself out. At first, I thought it'd be a real relief, says Gwiggs, but then I got home and just hung around, and it was the most boring time of my life. I knew I was going to go back. The rest of the band knew as well, or at least maintained to themselves as much as anyone else, that his absence was only temporary. In the meantime, the band had to draft in a replacement, and someone came up with the name of Scott McLeod, bassist with a Manchester band called the Yah-Yahs, a group advised by former Stone Roses manager Gareth Evans. McLeod's technical ability was of less concern than the fact that his appointment would keep things within a group of people that they knew. And Scott, no matter how talented he may have been, was never going to be offered a permanent position. The problems within the band may have seemed important to them, but the kids down at Woolworths were more concerned with something else. Initial reviews for the album Morning Glory were bewilderingly lukewarm, more of the writers expressing disappointment that it wasn't simply a rewrite of Definitely Maybe. There were suggestions that the band were out of the depth, trying to do anything other than straightforward Rama-Lama rock, and that in trying to expand their sound they dissipated their strength. Morning Glory was dismissed as merely ordinary. But those reviews of Morning Glory, they were wrong. I try to defend both the criticisms and the accolades, but deep down, I know where my instinctive allegiance lies. Call me a quisling and give me the light for that Molotov. The press were wrong. Despite the reviews, within 4 days of release, the album had sold almost 250,000 copies, and by the end of the week had notched up 346,000 sales, only 4,000 short of the all-time record held by Michael Jackson's album Bad. By the end of the year, it would have sold over 1,750,000 copies, and by the summer of '96, it had gone platinum 9 times over. The first 5 gigs of the next American tour went really well, especially at Roseland in New York and the Orpheum in Boston, where the crowd seemed to really support a sound that defiantly offered an alternative to the increasingly lazy echoes of grunge. Oasis was singing stuff that came from the heart, and while it might have seemed quaintly odd in Britain, in America it was like torching the president. Saying in interviews with the American press that you don't much care about stateside success is apparently tantamount to buggering your firstborn. When an audience start humming your tunes even after what you've said, you know you're onto something. A week in America had suggested just as much to the members of the band who'd been in America before. Is the big but going to mosey along? What do you think? Of course it is. We played this gig in Pittsburgh, says Noel, and Scott went and sat on the bus afterwards with Margaret, our tour manager. The next day she said, he can't handle it, he's going home. He hadn't said anything to me or anyone else, he was just there one night and gone the next. Cutting short the tour, the band made a cursory appearance on the David Letterman show and flew back to Britain. Scott rung me when I got back, said Noel, and he said, look, I think I made a mistake. I went, yeah, you made a big mistake, bye. He let us down, and he wasn't going to get a second chance. By now, Gwiggs had grown tired of his self-enforced redundancy. The recognition of boredom and a short course of Prozac had convinced him there would never be a buzz like the feeling he got from playing with Oasis. He was back, and back for the biggest gigs of Oasis' career. On the 4th and 5th of November, they played Earl's Court, the biggest indoor venue in Europe. Tickets sold out within hours. Oasis casually packing a place that had taken David Bowie 10 years to fill. A couple of weeks earlier, I bumped into Noel at a cast gig at London's Astoria. You've got to hear the guest list for Earl's Court, he'd said. Madonna, U2, Elton John, George Michael, McCartney, Pete Townsend, Oliver Reed, Stan Bowles, George Best, Ray Davies, Mick Jagger, Colin Bell, the lot. Everyone's either a genius or an alcoholic, or both. It's going to be brilliant. And he was right. The last show of the year was at Manchester's 9X Arena. And a sign of the regard in which Noel was held by fellow songwriters came when George Michael drove up with a dozen of his friends just to see the show. The partying went on for 2 days, Liam only turning up in London 48 hours later at the recording for Jools Holland's BBC Later show. At the first rehearsal, as the band unveiled their cover version of Slade's Come On Feel the Noise, as well as orchestrally supplemented versions of Wonderwall and Round Our Way, it soon became obvious that Liam's voice was unbroadcastably ragged. He stormed off Jools Holland's stage and straight to the dressing room to sleep, leaving Noel to do the singing for the actual performance. Afterwards, the atmosphere understandably tense, everyone trooped home, in no mood for celebration. It was time for the management to remind everyone that the partying had to calm down for a bit. Wonderwall entered the American Billboard charts at number 21. For 31 years, the Beatles held the record for the highest ever debut entry into the Billboard charts, coming in at number 45 in 1964 with I Wanna Hold Your Hand. In October 95, Edwyn Collins' A Girl Like You had entered at number 42. For Oasis to go in at 21 was a far greater achievement than was perhaps recognised even at the time. And the reason for the success of Wonderwall? Basically because it sounded like the Beatles. Listeners were ringing radio stations asking to hear that Beatles song, genuinely convinced that it was an old song by the Fab Four. Even when they knew it was by Oasis, they still kept on requesting it. The song touched something inside them, something that recalled the straightforward elegance of old songs by the Beatles and their contemporaries. Retro? Maybe. They didn't care. They listened to Wonderwall and they understood. Keep it simple. Remember, keep it simple. Back in Britain at the end of 95, Oasis could look back on one of the most extraordinary years in the history of British pop as a global power. As they prepared for an extended performance on Channel 4's The White Room, they were in understandably high spirits. Afterwards, Creation hosted a Christmas party at the Halcyon Hotel in Holland Park, where they handed the band some very special Christmas presents. Drummer Alan White got a radio-controlled Mini Cooper and the key to a real one, while for Bonehead there was a Rolex, for Liam a guitar, and for Gwiggs membership of a gym. Nothing, apparently, for Noel. "Come outside," said Alan McGee, taking him out into the street. "There's your present," he said, pointing at a chocolate-brown Rolls-Royce Corniche parked outside. For the first time in years, Noel was lost for words. But I can't even drive," he eventually managed. Fortunately, the car came with a chauffeur and a long-term reserved parking space in an underground car park, so he wouldn't have to leave such an ostentatious gift outside his house. McGee had recalled that when the band was starting and someone asked Noel what he wanted out of it all, he'd said he'd love a Rolls-Royce. Considering the turnover that Oasis had brought to Creation, it was the least he could do. 1996 started with Wonderwall still in the charts and reflected success for a couple of Oasis tribute bands, the Gallaghers and Noasis. Both got the seal of approval from the Real article, particularly the latter, whose gigs Noel regularly attends, "'cause it's like seeing us and I never get a chance to experience that." The band had also established a bond with the Bootleg Beatles, whose tribute act had provided the support at the Earl's Court gigs. Better still, Noel had been hanging out with the real Paul McCartney, having been introduced both at the Help album recording session at Abbey Road and through a friendship with his daughter Stella. "I went round to his house," says Noel, "and he said, 'You remind me a lot of what we were like, the whole look and everything.' I said, 'I should think so, I've spent enough money trying.' Anyway, he'd heard Morning Glory and said he really liked some of the songs. It was a buzz to hear that." One rumour had it that McCartney said to Noel, "You're going to run out of Beatles riffs to rip off before too long," to which Noel replied, "I don't think so, I've got all the bootlegs to get through yet." Sadly, it turns out to be an apocryphal tale, but you won't find Noel too quick in denying it. Morning Glory had already taken up residency in the top 5 in the American album charts and was outselling all opposition in Europe. After a few dates in Germany, the band returned to Britain to play a short British tour before announcing their biggest ever dates, 2 shows at Main Road in April. The 40,000 tickets for the first show sold out in under 2 hours, a similar amount for the second, taking only another couple of hours to do the same. It was obvious that Oasis mania was showing little sign of abating. Not surprising then that a whole heap of awards continued to come their way. At the NME Brat ceremony, they picked up 4: Best Album, Best Band, Best Single and Best Live Act, and Noel even ended up with a couple of bizarre animal statuettes for the album from a Finnish magazine. They had pride of place on top of his TV set. The big industry awards are the Brits, and it was no surprise to see them clean up at the ceremony, winning Best Band, Best Album and Best Video for Wonderwall. There was a definite sense of vindication in that they trounced Blur in all categories, and as the night drew on, they took full advantage of both drinking everything within arm's reach and publicly berating all opposition. Arguments ensued with host Chris Evans and backstage with Michael Hutchence, a row that spilled over into the awards ceremony itself. Liam offering to accompany Hutchence outside for a scrap. In accepting their awards, they found time, amid the defiantly obstreperous tomfoolery, to name-check Alan McGee and urge viewers to go out and vote Labour. Leader Tony Blair was there, with his second-in-command, John Prescott. After the awards, Prescott came up to the table where I was sitting with Gwiggs and said to the Oasis bassist, "So, you're the main men I've heard about then?" No one was quite sure what on earth he was on about, but the fact that he recognised them was a source of some pleasure. Michael Jackson's overblown, tastelessly messianic performance at the awards had caused Jarvis Cocker from Pulp to embark on a one-man protest, invading the stage, wiggling his arse and flicking V signs everywhere. Cocker found himself hauled off stage and taken straight to the police station. Later, back at the Landmark Hotel, where Oasis was celebrating the victory with another all-night party in session, Cocker turned up to a hero's welcome. "It was fucking brilliant what he did," Noel enthused. "He should have punched the fucker." In unstoppable mood, they headed back to America for a series of East Coast dates that saw them more enthusiastically received than ever before. Ben Studd of Melody Maker travelled out to see them in Philadelphia and found that the fans saw in Oasis a genuinely new future for the American rock environment. Ben Studd was equally impressed. "The greatest rock and roll band in the world?" he asked at the end of his piece, immediately answering his own question, "I have not a single doubt." Ben's Melody Maker interview with Noel included a quote from the latter about how the band were lads and how their upbringing and background were always going to affect what they did and how they behaved. "We've burgled houses and nicked car stereos and we like girls and we swear and we take the piss," said Noel, making a point with dramatic effect rather than seriously confessing to a life of crime. Nevertheless, reports of his quote resulted in Manchester's police reopening several lines of enquiry into unsolved burglaries in an unbelievably naive or incredibly stupid attempt to hold the band responsible for the city's entire crime figures for the past 5 years. Not that the band were particularly concerned at the furore. When Liam was asked by a Daily Mirror reporter whether there was any truth to the accusations of burglary, he deadpanned, "Yeah, I've done loads. I'm doing your house tonight." A week after the Philadelphia gig, I went to see them in New York for the closing date of the tour. It was a landmark gig. Held at the Paramount, an annex of Madison Square Garden, it had sold out in a matter of hours. Oasis went down a storm. Despite the fact that it was far from being one of the best performances, they could afford to cruise through the proceedings, getting by merely on the strength of the songs and the tornado at their heart that can blow the roof off buildings even when whirling on half strength. A crowd unused to such economic dynamism were left reeling with delight. Next stop, Main Road, the ground of Manchester City's football team. The two shows were extraordinary, but the practicalities of organising anything on such a large scale inevitably produced problems. The band had registered bookings at almost every hotel in Manchester to throw fans off the scent, but the roads around the stadium were so jammed that they had to spend most of each day inside the venue itself. Also, an almost non-existent security presence outside the ground meant a field day for the local urchins of Moss Side, most of whom seemed to spend the entire 48 hours in surrounding streets, stealing tickets and trying to sell them on for as much as £300 each. In the quiet moments in between, they whiled away the time throwing stones at anyone passing by. It led to a lot of nasty scenes that could easily have spilled over into a full-scale riot. "I'm a socialist," says Alan McGee, "but it tested even my faith in people. You look at places like that, though, and you see that crime is one of the only ways out. Another is pop music." And in many ways, Oasis are an iconic alternative to those very people with the Stanley knives and their own twist on the entrepreneurial impulse. The lads. One of them even blagged his way into the hospitality area, white cagoules zipped to the neck, moving with the familiar Liam Lope. And 40,000 heads turned in the stadium, thinking it was him, cheering and waving. For a moment, he was Liam. It's the dream at the heart of Oasis's appeal. For 2 nights on stage, Oasis showed just how intoxicatingly majestic that dream can be. Playing better than ever before and holding an aggregate audience of 80,000 people in the palm of their hand. It was one of the most emotionally powerful moments of my life. Both nights were filmed and taped for commercial release as part of their There and Then video. After the triumph, a chance to relax for the first time in 3 years. The band went home to girlfriends, bought houses, chilled out. Noel and Meg moved into a large house in St John's Wood, while Liam moved in with Patsy in preparation for buying a place of his own. And Noel got to fulfil another enduring ambition at the Royal Festival Hall when he sang on stage with his hero Burt Bacharach, his rendition of This Guy's in Love with You, well received by an audience that included Liam. "I was more scared doing that than anything I've ever done before," says Noel, whose dedication to Bacharach is so obsessive that he even possesses a programme for one of the man's 70s shows and takes great delight in revealing that Burt had a pet duck called Quack Quackarack. When you're the biggest band in the world, you're not supposed to take it easy. Stepping back to appreciate everything you've achieved becomes an open invite to all the dumb scavengers, the dickheads who huff and puff and finally get within hailing distance of the opportunity to make a quick buck. As Oasis took a breather, Sony tried to buy out Alan McGee's crucial 2% of creation's controlling interest, something which would tug ultimate control away from the man who understands exactly why Oasis mean much, much more than just a vehicle for churning out profits. "Oasis mean more to me than just money," says McGee. "Anyone who doesn't love them and have total belief in them doesn't deserve to be involved with anything they do. I told Sony, well, if you want the label, then Oasis and the Primals and everyone else are going to leave. They got the message, and we just renewed the old deal for 5 years. And I walked out with a banker's draft for £14.5 million. You can't try and turn Oasis into some sort of marketing thing. They're more important than that." 3 months off, and the band now prepared to prove it to themselves as much as to the people around them. The snapshots and memories were all very well, but adoration is a hard habit to kick. They had to get back to playing live, just like breathing, but bigger. I'm there to ask questions, get them to tell the archives what they're all about these days, give them somewhere to lob the cockiness. On this occasion, chirpy camaraderie is just about the last thing I feel like initiating, having found out a couple of hours earlier that my friend Rob Collins, keyboardist with the Charlatans, who were due to support Oasis at Loch Lomond and Nebworth, had died in a car crash the previous night. But it's obvious that at least I won't have to endure any tiresome petulance. Everyone in the band is in good shape and seemingly rejuvenated by the time off. They're tanned, comfortable and dressed with that slightly scruffy casualness that only the seriously rich can ever pull off. As Liam stands behind the mic, arms behind his back and mouth singing to the ceiling, I find myself wondering what it is about him that seems to come from somewhere so long ago. Then I realise he's smiling. He's really enjoying it. And so is Noel. Shirt untucked, he's hammering away at a Union Jack guitar, every inch the end of the century mod god. He swaps jokes with Griggs, Bonehead and Alan, all looking like they've remembered why being in a band always seemed so good in the first place. Oasis run through most of the set they intend playing live at the forthcoming shows. Towards the end, they give the first live performances of 2 new songs, My Big Mouth and Getting Better Man, both of which bode well for the 3rd album. Afterwards, there are brief exchanges of condolences about Collins' death, but so close to the time when Oasis are to leap back onto the carousel, it's understandably not something anyone wants to talk about too much. Intimations of mortality can't be allowed to intrude on the optimism. It wouldn't be fair to anybody. "I've just been in Capri," says Liam, "and people used to just come up and shout, 'Autograph!' With Patsy, they'd come up and tell her how beautiful she was. With me, it was just like, 'Sign this.' I was like, 'What about all the "you're so great" stuff?'" In the past, he would genuinely have been bothered. Nowadays, he's grown up and can actually appreciate the daftness of the situation and of his role in other people's fantasy. "We went on this yellow submarine," he enthuses. "It was brilliant. You go down, you see all these mad starfish and things. I was just sitting there going, 'We all live in a yellow submarine.' It'd be great to do a video on it." As with the rest of the band, it was his first break in ages, and while he enjoyed it, he's keen to play live again. "I'm right up for these gigs," he says. "I've been chilling out, taking it easy, but now I'm ready to go mad again. The gigs are gonna be great." Do you like the celebrity? It's just a job. It's something that I need to do for me. Though, I mean, you can have fun doing anything. It's just something I do, man. And when I'm doing it, I don't remember much about it. All I know is I'm mad for doing these gigs and doing the album and everything. I want to get back into it all again. Are you happy, Liam? Of course I'm happy. What do you think? A couple of years ago, After almost every Gallagher Brothers interview degenerated into argumentative chaos, Noel and Liam decided not to do any more interviews together. Today, however, they've got no qualms about sitting side by side and talking about their immediate future and their recent past. They never even come close to the kind of antagonism that marks so many of their early dual encounters with journalists. So, what have they been up to? Just taking it easy, says Noel. Going out, going on holiday, getting fat. Both of them reveal their stomachs, each able to pinch a good deal more than an inch. That's what success gets you, says Noel. A really big stomach. Oh yeah, and I've been making lots of money too. A few days earlier, he'd been up in Wales remixing the new single by American loopy post-folk performer Beck. Even a recent holiday in Mustique with girlfriend Meg and celeb friends the actor Johnny Depp and model Kate Moss couldn't drag him away from his guitar. I wrote loads of stuff for the next album, he says. Now we're right up for doing these gigs. Any memories of Main Road? The gigs themselves were brilliant. It was just all the shit around it that I hated. Getting the coach to and from the gig and all the gangs outside, that was just a hassle, but I really enjoyed the shows. The first night was the best, says Liam. Nah, the second was better, Noel counters. That was good, but it rained, concludes Liam. No arguments, no fistfights. Grown up at last. Both of them. With all the organisational hassles, why play such large shows in the first place? Everything's got so big that it's the only thing we can do, says Noel. I mean, there's 250,000 people who want tickets, and the only way they're going to get them is if we do something like Loch Lomond or Nebworth. And if you make a big event out of it, it becomes really special. They're going to be good gigs. As good as those ones a couple of years back in front of 100 people? Even better. I say that, but to be honest, I can't remember a lot of those old gigs like the 100 Club. I've seen photos and it looked like we were brilliant, but if I try to remember it, I can't. It's just a blank. I'd like to play there again, actually. Maybe we should do a secret tour of lost or little places, like Earl's Court. Or, he continues, warming to the idea, how about Manchester Boardwalk? Yeah, a 550-night residency at the Boardwalk. That's what we should do. Anywhere else? I'd still like to play Wembley Stadium. Liam splutters. What? Wembley Stadium is shit. We're not playing there. It'd be a laugh, insists Noel. Well, you can fucking do it on your own, Liam rightly decides. There's no way I'm going to play there. It's a dump. The manager, Marcus Russell, comes in. He looks as healthy and relaxed as the rest of them. Obviously, the rest has done everyone in their entourage a lot of good. He tells the band about a gig they've been booked to do in Hawaii. Just a small one, 2,500 people, but Hawaii all the same. It's a poetically neat location to blur the line between work and play, since it was in Hawaii that Alan McGee first heard a tape of Live Forever and decided that he had a world-shaking band on his hands. And it also fulfills a promise that Marcus made to the band when he first tried to convince them to have him as the manager. Noel adopts a cod Welsh accent as he recalls how Marcus sat them down and said, "Sign with me, boys, and you'll be playing Hawaii in 2.5 years, I promise you." He was right, Noel admits, but it took 3 years, not 2.5, so we'll go over and play the gig, then we'll sack him. Hawaii's going to be good, though. It's full of chicks, innit? Oh, yeah, I'm looking forward to going there. Any more ambitions? Musical or personal? Either. Personally, I'd really like to... No, I can't say that. And he swerves from revealing something that it's safe to assume would be gushy, heartfelt and involving Meg. I can tell you what I'd like to do. I'd like to commit serious bodily harm on someone, and they know who they are. A lot more like the expected public face of Oasis. Anything less, enigmatic? I'd like to learn to drive, get some more money, write some more songs, make some more records, just keep on doing what we've been doing. Liam? Dunno, I'm up for everything at the moment. I want to play some gigs again, buy a house, do the next album, whatever. I wouldn't mind doing some films, or some collaborations. That'd be good. Would you make a good actor? I'd be a good painter and decorator. Yeah, Batman or something. I'd be well up for that. We don't make plans so far ahead anymore, says Noel. We can afford to do what we want. Who knows what we'll be doing in 2 years? Probably sitting here with you again, telling you how much things have changed since Nebworth. Any messages for the fans coming along to your gigs? Stand in front of my side of the stage, because I'm the best looking one, says Noel. No way, interjects Liam. Stand at my side of the stage. I'm much better looking than him. Noel spots a technicality. You haven't got a side of the stage, you dick. You're in the middle, remember? OK, well, stand in front of me middle then. I don't know about any messages, says Noel. Come along, have a good time, clap at the end of the songs. Just do what you do at gigs. Everything comes so easy these days. Does that make it harder to come up with records that are actually going to touch anybody? It's all about the songs, says Noel. People are only going to keep going out to buy your records if you've got the songs to back it all up. And we have. There's 15 done for the next album, but I've got loads more ready to go right now. This band has always been about having great songs, and we always will. We're not going to get lazy and just put out a load of shit. Everything we do takes things another stage further than they were before. And with that, they're up and gone. Liam off to see Patsy, Noel off to Camden to buy a Lambretta, scooters having become almost as enticing a drain on his disposable income as guitars. He's even talked about getting special scooter flight cases made so the band can take them on tour with them. They've got all the trappings of the archetypal rich pop stars, and many groups before them have marked that as exactly the point where things came unglued, security robbing them of the solidarity and drive that defined their rise to prominence, the moment when your sound gets as flabby as your stomach. I may be completely wrong, but I have an idea Oasis aren't going to fade away quite so easily. The tapes of the next album certainly suggest that it's far too early to start talking of the career being over. They could be just about to embark on the most artistically worthwhile work to date. And then there's still a whole universe of possibilities. When they first got together, there were loads of people ready to tell them they'd never make it. And when they started to sell, almost as many smugly warned they'd never make it in America. The soothsayers of doom are resolutely insisting that no one is ever truly going to match the status of the Beatles or the Stones. This despite the fact that a recent poll established them as more popular than the Beatles amongst under-25s in Britain, while year-end record sales confirmed them as the best-selling rock band on the planet. Oasis are already arguably one of the 10 most important rock bands in musical history, and it's clear that there's still a whole lot more to come. On a personal level, they've given me more pleasure and inspiration than any other group, as people as much as artists, and I'm sure there are an awful lot of others whose life they've changed. It's been a wild 3 years, and I feel genuinely privileged to have been so close to it all. I still tingle every time I see them play live, and I can't imagine a time when their records won't affect me as powerfully as they do. But I'm just as captivated by the possibilities their future still holds as by the worth of what they've already done. Oasis, I thank you, and I'm buzzing for tomorrow.